He's 33. He has a job, a car, maybe even a girlfriend who cooks his meals and reminds him to pay his bills. He plays video games until 3 a.m. on a work night. He hasn't had a real conversation about the future in over a year because every time it comes up, he changes the subject or gets defensive. You've met this man. You might be dating him. You might be raising him. You might, if you're honest with yourself, be him. We call him the man-child. It's become a meme, a punchline, a dating red flag people joke about on TikTok. But behind the joke is a real, well-documented psychological phenomenon, one with identifiable causes, predictable patterns, and in many cases, a real path out of it. This video isn't about mocking anyone. It's about understanding why this happens, because once you understand the mechanism, it stops being a mystery and starts being something you can actually address. Who do we call a man-child? Let's get precise, because man-child gets thrown around loosely. Psychologically, we're not talking about someone who's simply immature in a surface way, likes cartoons, plays video games, has a silly sense of humor. Plenty of well-adjusted adults do that. The root causes. This is the core of the video. There isn't one single cause. It's usually a combination of these factors. Overparenting and the removal of natural consequences. Developmental psychology is fairly consistent on this. Children build emotional resilience by experiencing manageable failure and having to solve their own problems. When parents consistently intervene, fixing conflicts with teachers, doing tasks the child should be doing themselves, shielding them from the natural fallout of poor choices, the child doesn't learn that discomfort is survivable. They learn that discomfort is something that gets removed by someone else. This is sometimes called snowplow or lawnmower parenting, clearing every obstacle before the child even reaches it. The result, years later, is an adult who unconsciously expects the same treatment from a partner, a boss, or a friend group. Avoidant attachment style. Attachment theory gives us another lens. People with an avoidant attachment style, often formed from inconsistent or emotionally unavailable caregiving in childhood, tend to cope with stress by withdrawing rather than engaging. In adult relationships, this shows up as shutting down during conflict, avoiding define-the-relationship conversations, and retreating into solitary activities, gaming, scrolling, work, rather than facing an uncomfortable emotional conversation. It's not that they don't care. It's that closeness and conflict both register as threat, and withdrawal is the nervous system's learned solution. Fear of failure disguised as apathy. A lot of what looks like laziness is actually fear avoidance. If you never really try, never commit to the career move, never propose, never take the risk, you never have to face the possibility of visible failure. Psychologists sometimes call this a self-worth protection strategy. Not trying feels safer than trying and being seen to fail. Because I didn't try preserves the fantasy of I could have succeeded if I wanted to. Apathy in this context isn't the absence of ambition, it's armor. Escapism as emotional regulation. Gaming, pornography, endless scrolling, these aren't the root problem, they're the coping mechanism. They offer immediate, low-effort dopamine and a sense of control in a contained system, which is very appealing to someone who feels overwhelmed or incompetent in the messier, unscripted parts of adult life. Relationships, career ambiguity, financial planning. The issue isn't that these activities exist. It's when they become the default response every time real-world responsibility gets uncomfortable. The societal layer. It's worth zooming out because this isn't purely an individual failing. There are structural factors too. Delayed milestones. Compared to previous generations, adults today are marrying later, buying homes later, and reaching financial independence later, often for legitimate economic reasons: housing costs, wage stagnation, education costs. This delay can blur the internal sense of when am I supposed to feel like an adult, making arrested development easier to hide inside a broader trend. Digital escapism infrastructure. Never before has it been this easy to fully avoid boredom, discomfort, and social risk. Streaming, gaming, and algorithmic content are engineered to be more immediately rewarding than the slow, effortful payoff of real growth. Shifting gender role expectations. As traditional roles have shifted, many men were never explicitly taught what emotional maturity looks like outside old provider-based scripts, leaving a gap that wasn't necessarily replaced with a new model. None of this excuses individual behavior, but it explains why this pattern has become so widespread rather than a rare outlier. What it looks like in relationships. This is where the pattern becomes most visible to the people around him. The mommy-partner dynamic. The partner manages appointments, finances, even emotional regulation, essentially replicating a caretaker role. Conflict avoidance. This is where silence, deflection, or humor is used to sidestep any serious conversation. It usually doesn't end well and speaks to one's identity as a man-child. Resentment loops. The partner feels increasingly like a manager rather than an equal, leading to burnout. The man-child senses the resentment, but responds with withdrawal rather than repair, reinforcing the exact dynamic causing it. Can it change? Here's the important, hopeful part. Arrested development is not a fixed trait. It's a set of learned patterns, and learned patterns can be unlearned. What actually tends to work, according to clinical literature on emotional maturity development, removing the safety net. Natural consequences have to be allowed to happen. A partner or parent stepping back, even briefly, often creates the first real motivation for change. Therapy focused on avoidance patterns. This solution particularly approaches that address avoidant attachment and fear of failure cycles, like CBT or attachment-focused therapy. Genuine internal motivation. External pressure, an ultimatum, a breakup can be the spark. But lasting change requires the person to want the identity shift for themselves, not just to avoid losing something. The man-child isn't a character flaw stamped at birth. It's a psychological adaptation, shaped by parenting, attachment, fear, and a culture that makes avoidance easier than ever. Understanding that doesn't excuse the behavior, but it does mean there's a way out, for the people living it, and for the people loving them. If this resonated with you, whether you saw yourself in this or someone you know, let me know in the comments. And if you want the follow-up video on how partners can navigate this without losing themselves in the process, subscribe, because that one's coming next.